Bruce Lorincz, and this show is called Bruce on the Loose. I talk to people in the educational field, government, and people in general, businesses we've featured lately. Sarah Conrad of Bartlett Cook Flowers we had on a show recently, and went back in her room to see where the flowers are made and the arrangements, and it was a very nice show if you want to take a look at that. And also in the past we've had other shows about the new 5th and 6th grade building being planned right now on basically near the high school site, and that should be interesting to watch this summer as well. Kathleen Paydo is our guest today. Kathleen is an author of a very important topic of foster care. And Kathleen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What piqued your interest initially in foster care?
Well, I tell people my first taste of it was going to see the play Annie when I was a young child. My parents took me to Cleveland, and I thought that old Miss Hannigan was so mean to those little girls. I walked out of that play and I said to my dad I was going to run an orphanage when I got older, but when I got older there really weren't orphanages around, and so that's why my husband and I got into foster care.
The children involved in foster care are really victims of circumstances, aren't they?
They sure are. They are good children. They have a bad reputation, and so do foster parents, by the way, but most children and foster parents are really good people, and they want to try very hard to help the children pass their circumstances and the development of their God-given talents.
There probably are a lot of reasons, and a myriad of reasons why children get placed in foster care. And I would imagine today with the pandemic and financial concerns with gas and everyday items, groceries, I imagine this hasn't gone away, has it?
That's true. Children can be removed for abuse or neglect or dependency reasons, and those are kind of all legal terms. The abuse is kind of obvious. Neglect happens because we're seeing so much drug abuse in our world, and it is just affecting the way parents parent their children. They're very hands-off, they don't have money, they're spending money on the wrong things, and the children are just severely neglected. Then dependency differs just a little bit. It's like neglect, but it's found to be through no fault of the parent. So for example, if a parent has mental illness, then that would be neglect. But the drug issue is the big problem. That's the underlying cause of most of the reasons that children are removed from their biological families and placed in foster care.
Do we have a typical picture of a family that would be interested in foster care?
Not really. Foster parents are of all ages. I know foster parents who are 20 years old, and I know foster parents who are 65. So that is a calling that people of different ages get at different times in their life. And my husband and I have been doing it since we were in our 20s. And so most of our 35-year marriage we have spent with additional children in our home. Some people only foster for a few years and then they adopt the children that come through their home. And then other families like myself and Ron, we just foster. And so the children come through our home, we get them as strong and as stabilized as we can, and then they will either move on back to their own biological family if things at home are better, and if things are not better at home, then they will maybe go to a kinship placement, might be a relative to them, or they may be adopted, and then we would transition them to the next family.
What benefits does a foster family receive once maybe that child has gone on to one of those paths as you just described?
Well, it's a very rewarding job. We stay in contact with a lot of our children. Not all of them. Some families don't want to be in contact, but the ones that do want to be in contact, we enjoy having a relationship with those children. And for youngsters, we go and visit at Christmas and take a Christmas gift. But we have boys that are 30 and 35 now, and we've gone to baptisms and weddings and graduations for their families. So that emotional attachment lasts a really long time.
The impact that the families have on these children is immeasurable, isn't it?
I feel like it is. Now certainly there are a few foster homes out there that are just doing the minimal care. And I encourage everyone to do the best they can being foster parents, because you do make such an impact on the child. And having a really good foster care experience can make all of the difference in the life of a child, helping them pass that initial trauma that brought them into foster care. And quite frankly, even coming into foster care is a trauma to a certain degree. And helping them find their God-given talents and moving towards becoming, citizens of our society that are working, functioning citizens. You can have a really big impact planting seeds along the way when the children are young, and it does last. We've had some teenagers call us years and years after they've been through our home and say, I saw what you had. I saw that you had an intact family, and you had a father in the home, which is a really big thing. And you had groceries in your cupboard, and we went to school every day, and now I'm raising my children that way. So we do have a big impact.
Yeah, that routine. Once children get in a routine, I would think that would really be sustainable, and they would remember that for years to come.
I believe that's true. Some, of course, don't do well. There's always the exception to the rule.
Sure.
But in general, I think that children really do appreciate understanding a routine of a regular day, not so much chaos, because these children come from homes a lot of times where there's a lot of chaos, very limited structure, and they actually really thrive with having some discipline and some set limits, and that does help them down the road. It helps them do better in school, and it helps them make friendships. A lot of the children don't really come into care with having good solid friendships with other friends, but if they do, part of a foster parent's job is to help uphold those friendships. And we visit with biological families, and if there's an aunt or a grandma that's especially important to that child, we'll do phone calls, we'll send pictures, but we try very hard to keep the children bonded with their family. It's very good for them.
Kathleen, you gave me a segue when you said schools. What do foster parents do in regards to getting the children into the right grade and the assistance from the school and the teachers and maybe special assistance?
Well, I tell you, Wadsworth City Schools have been fantastic to my foster children through the years. The teachers have really bent over backwards to get them placed in the right programs. So initially, the agency that you sign up through, like either Summit County or Medina County, whatever county you live in or county you're near, they will have somebody who will do that initial work of getting them registered. But then we work with the teachers one-on-one, and they'll usually request that the children be assessed, and that's always appropriate. And then they get them the special services that they need. So shout out to Wadsworth City Schools. They have really done a fantastic job. It's not easy. The children come into care, and then sometimes maybe a relative from Vermont calls the agency and says, yes, I'm willing to take the children. And so 6 weeks after they've been placed in school, they're pulled and they're sent to Vermont with the aunt or uncle. So it's a tough job, and they do a valiant effort at it.
It certainly is. Once the routine is set and they get in a good groove, and then, as you say, they're pulled out and maybe pulled to another city in Ohio or certainly in another portion of the country. So
that's right.
It's very difficult for those children. Is there a time frame that foster care happens, or is it kind of situation bound?
I say to people 2 days to 2 years is kind of typical.
Okay.
A 2-day placement might be where there is a relative somewhere that the agency is looking at and doing a quick home assessment on and seeing if they're appropriate to take the children into care. But by law, the parents have a year to work a case plan. So they have 12 months to meet the goals, and their goals might be to, get counseling for drug abuse, go to treatment for that, get counseling for parenting skills, find stable housing. These are all things that the parents have to meet. And if they meet that goal, then the magistrate or judge will likely send them home. So they do have a year, but they could also be granted 2 6-month extensions by the courts. And that's where you get to that 2-year mark. And then typically at that time, they try very hard to find a permanent home for the child, whether it's going to be adoption, returning to their biological family, or a kinship placement of some sort.
Can you tell us the percentage that adoption may be feasible for children?
So I will tell you that about 50% of children go home from foster care.
Okay.
Some counties it's 70%, some counties it's 40%, but kind of typically. And there's about 450,000 foster children in the United States. Wow. So there are a lot, and hopefully 50% get home. That other 50% end up either in kinship or adoption.
Well, maybe that time in foster care gets the the family organized and they get help, as you mentioned, and maybe get their act together so they can take on the responsibility of raising children. Does that sometimes happen?
I like the idea that we're kind of a hospital now. I'm a registered nurse, so I like to think of things in that sort of medical way. But as a hospital, I feel like I triage the children when they come in. And you wear a little bit of a detective's hat because you have to figure out what are their medical needs, what are their emotional needs, and do your best to get counseling set up for the children. You have to advocate for them. You can't just let them sit at home. You need to get them into ballet class or baseball or something, because all of these things are important for the child's development. And what we're trying to do is firm up their foundation a little bit. They've had a little bit of a rocky start in life, and they need to have their foundation firmed up a little bit. We take them to church. We teach children about God. He's with you, and He's your friend, and He helps you make good decisions. And most children really, they want that foundation, and they want to understand these higher thinking levels in life.
Do families receive any compensation from either the state of Ohio or the counties in which they might reside?
We do. We receive reimbursement. So you get about $1 an hour per child to take care of a child. But then out of that comes their clothing and their food and their Easter baskets and their Christmas presents and all of those things. So I will say that I have kind of figured this out. My husband and I have sat down. We probably pitch in about $300 to $500 a month per child to raise a child. It's not enough to cover your expenses, but it certainly does help.
I would imagine we touched base a second ago about the help and guidance that these children have. That's critical, isn't it? Barriers, they really are kind of going without really guidance and help from the parents. The parents have concerns that they have to deal with. That's really important for these children, isn't it?
It is. So part of foster care is supporting the biological family. We want them to get better. We want them to tackle some of the problems they're having in their homes. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But our direct responsibility is to help boost the child's inner strength and physical strength, to be honest with you. Many of them come in very medically neglected, malnourished. So we have to do a lot of that. But the whole goal is to strengthen up both sides. The child individually, do what we can to support the family along the way, and hope that reunification will happen.
If there's parents out there watching our show today and they're not really sure about the decision for fostering, is there any training or any information they could get to assist them to make that decision to foster?
Absolutely. I will tell you, I wrote a book about fostering.
Wow.
And I feel like it's pretty inclusive about, people understanding the system. So that's one way. Another way is to contact their county that they live in or near. And everybody has recruitment officers to help you figure out whether you are interested or not. So I encourage anybody who has any interest, or you can contact me personally. I'm always happy to talk to people. My husband and I work hard to promote foster care around our community, and also to help people understand that you don't necessarily have to be a foster parent to help a foster child. You can latch onto a foster family and be a support family for them. You could babysit or cook a meal sometimes, or take a child fishing. I mean, there are so many things that foster families need to be strong and to stay in the program, because sadly, we lose 50% of our foster parents after the first year that they license. And that's a really bad thing, because not only do you have to recruit another family, but your county just ate the cost of, licensing you, which it's very hard to get a number. I've gotten anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000 to $8,000 to license a foster home.
Wow.
That's what our costs are, individual counties. And so if we can retain the parents we have and not have people quit after the first year, that would really help our county budgets. It would also help the children have homes that have more experience. You don't always want to be new. You want to develop some experience along the line. And this is a special type of parenting. You have to, work at it a while until you become proficient with it. But anybody who's interested in it, I encourage you to try. I think it's a very good experience. Of the many, many dozens of children we've had through our home, we've had very few that were really a big problem. Mostly they just fit right into our family very nicely for the time period they were with us.
Kathleen, what what are some of the contributing factors in people not continuing with the program after a year? That would be very difficult for county officials, and something happened along the way that they had not a very positive outcome.
To be honest, what I think the issue is, I feel that people don't realize the level of commitment that's required. You give up quite a bit of your own privacy. You know, there's constantly people through your home. You're constantly documenting what you did, where you went. I just don't think, we have to change our plans all the time. You know, I give an example in my book that we were on our way in 2016 was when we won the championship with LeBron in town.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so that was wonderful. Everyone was going to parties. We were going down to Lock 3 in Akron to a party. And I get a phone call, and the social worker is pleading with me, could you please take these 2 children? I can't get anyone else to answer their phone tonight. So, you know, we had to, you know, take a detour and down the road and pick up the new foster children, and we didn't end up going to our party that night. So we frequently have to change our plans at the last minute. I just think some of those are reasons, and I do talk about that in my book. Like, I feel that foster parents need to be a little more realistically prepared, and that's something that my husband and I like to talk to groups about.
Kathleen, we could have had 2 parties that year. The Indians
we were so close.
Were in Game 7, tied the game up late in the innings, and oh boy,
that hurt.
Yes,
we were so close.
Yes. Well, the Cubs. I mean, both teams were certainly happy to win, and the Cubs hadn't won in a century. But we could have had 2 parties.
That's
then.
true. That's
what
true.
about respite? My brother was involved in fostering, and he went ahead and sometimes would volunteer to have a weekend or a week to have respite. That would have helped with your party at Block 3, right? If someone would have taken them for a couple days.
That's true. Well, they hadn't been placed in my home yet, so that wouldn't have helped that specific situation.
That's
but
correct.
You're right. I'm glad you brought that up about respite. There's respite providers and alternative caregivers, and these are people who go through minimal paperwork, a background check, and a discipline policy that you understand the agency's discipline policy. And besides that, then you can be certified to be a caregiver for a foster child, you know, even for a few hours, or there are several families in town who will do like a week's vacation for me if I'm going out of town and the children aren't able to go with us. So alternative caregivers and respite providers are just key to helping with longevity of foster families. There are not a ton of families that stay in it as a career, and we're looking for families that are more willing to stay in it long term. And definitely the secret is having some good support families behind you. I would say I have at least 5 here in Wadsworth that I can call at the drop of a hat, and they'll just do just about anything to help me out.
Well, that's good to know that you have support behind, and you could always use more, I would imagine. Those people sometimes go on vacation, have other things coming up in their family, and you could always use probably more support along the way.
That's true.
What about, we talked on activities and how they are important, and now it seems like we have an array of things. Dance, we can get into theater. I see coming in today, the YMC had activities for youth that they could be involved in things throughout the morning. That's good to see. And athletics. Why are those types of things positive for children?
Because they normalize their life. These children come from such an abnormal background most of the time, and they need normalcy and they need stability. We come up here to the YMCA all the time and swim at the pools, indoor and outdoor. It's such a treat for them. I've had children that have grown up in abandoned houses, abandoned trailers, hotel rooms, and they just don't have these life experiences. So going to the library is a big deal. We came downtown for the parade over Memorial Day, and that was just a delightful activity for them. So we try to get everybody into some activity that is, you know, something like baseball or dance, or but then they just, even things like having a rock collection. I mean, like, these are great things the kids love, and many have just not had that opportunity in the past.
And I think Wadsworth does a good job. You mentioned library. They have Saturday mornings, Tales for Tales, and they have dogs there to help the children read. And also they have other, certainly, outreach programs. and sports are everywhere you take a look at, and clubs and groups, and sometimes we forget about the church. And I think you mentioned earlier about the church, and they have fellowship groups and certainly Sunday school. The churches welcome young people along the way. The last poll I saw said that less than 50% of the people say they're really aligned with a particular church. That troubles me very much. How can the church help a foster program?
So I will tell you that almost all of my caregivers were a family that came up to me at church and tapped me on the shoulder and said, we'd like to get to know your family a little bit better. We're interested in foster care and how we can help your family. And I met these delightful families because they introduced their self to me. So the community of the church is just invaluable. Our faith is invaluable. It keeps us strong as foster parents. If we don't have a strong family ourselves, it's pretty hard to bring troubled children into the family. So you have to have a pretty stable your own family first, and then you bring children in, and then you can help them. But if your family's in disarray and you don't have a lot of stability in the foundation of your own family, I think that's where some people get into trouble. And so I think faith and family and church go hand in hand, no doubt.
I think sometimes we forget that ministers can be quasi-counselors. My daughter, I have to confession, is a minister.
Okay.
And she has people come in on a weekly basis talking about family issues, and some of it revolves around children and concerns in the family, and she does her best to go ahead and give suggestions and hints and tips, and ministers can be very vital as well.
Absolutely. Counseling is so important for foster children. Almost all foster children go to counseling. It can be faith-based, it can be through a community group, but they need to be able to talk through their problems. They have all suffered loss in their lifetime. I will tell you an example of two teens that we had several years ago. These children were, they just were so secluded from the rest of the world. They didn't have any faith. There was a neighborhood cat that was beloved to them, but they would spend a lot of time indoors. Their mom didn't like the outdoors. She had what they called a bad room, and she would be, under the influence of drugs, and would lock them in this bad room, and, then 2 days later would let them out, and literally I'm talking about being in this room for 2 days at a time, and she would wonder why they were in there. So the children just need that stability, and church and faith and family all comes together to help heal those traumas that they've suffered in their past.
How is Ohio doing? The state responsibility is to take care of the needy throughout the state, welfare programs, et cetera. How would you say the state of Ohio is doing in regards to foster care?
I'd give them a medium score. There's a lot of change going on, which is good, but it is part of the governor's interest to work on the foster care system, and there have been some initiatives to work on that. And one thing that has improved is in the past, when I was younger, when you were younger, children came into foster care and just spent their whole childhood in foster care. And so part of that was shortening the span that a child can stay in foster care. Now, there are some exceptions, but in general, children need to be placed in a stable environment by that 2-year mark. So it's coming along. As any history, we've learned from the mistakes of our past. Foster care started way back in the 1800s when they would put children on the orphan trains and send them out west to work on farms. Children were not treated well. They did not get to stay with their siblings. And so there were many mistakes learned along the way, but it's improved, and it's continuing to improve. But I do have to also say that children's problems are bigger these days, because you used to have a child would come into care for some physical abuse or something. We just don't see something that simple anymore. It's very, very deep with the neglect issues and dependency issues. And children are just needing all sorts of things like food and nutrition and medical care and supervision and guidance and love. And they're just not getting that consistently at home. It's the main reason children are coming into care anymore.
We see the trickle down in the governmental system. How about Medina County? Would you say that they try their best to help out the situation?
I'd give them a medium score. I think, yes, there are many cases that go well. I have seen some cases where children should have been removed far before the time they were removed. Right. And by the time they were removed, it was a dangerous situation. My husband and I also work in Summit County with Summit County Children's Services, and we've seen, unfortunately, we've had 3 cases throughout the years where there was actually a deceased sibling in the house by the time the other children came to our home. So, and that's just our home and our experience. So they do the best they can, but the problem is there's just too many children and not enough workers. So again, my thought is if we could work on retaining our foster parents and not cost our county so much money in constantly recruiting and retraining new ones, that money could be spent elsewhere, possibly with more social workers, giving them a better ratio. I asked a social worker one time, how many cases are you supposed to have at a time? And she said, well, about 12. About 12 cases would be normal. How many do you have? Well, she had 22 at the time, and that was actually like 35 children in those 22 cases. And that's about double what her workload should be. So that's the problem. It's not people not wanting to do a good job. It's just the amount of work is so high.
Kathleen Paydo, I've learned a great deal about fostering, and certainly if there are people in the community considering this, they should go ahead and take the step. And it's not a long-term commitment, I think I've learned. It could be used, as you said, 2 days, if I remember correctly, to 2 years.
Correct, that's right.
Thanks for viewing Bruce on the Loose, and we have a show coming up with 4 Cities Educational Compact with Mr. Roger Wright. Thank you very much.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.